Welcome to State of the Offense. Today we will look at the wide receiver position in the NFC East. We will cover all players who have top 60 ADPs. In 12-man leagues, most teams average around 5 wide receivers per team, so 60 is a good number to work with. The New York Giants have a lot of uncertainty at the position, where they have 6 wide receivers who can end up as top 3 wide receivers on their team. Right now, Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton are the top 2 on the depth chart, but the Giants have less money and draft capital invested in them than 4 other candidates who the team is either more invested in or more accomplished in the NFL. Because of the uncertainty of the Giants' wide receiver group, none of their wide receivers are necessarily worth drafting. Another factor to consider with the wide receivers in New York is that focus is on the running game with Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. They were number 25 in pass attempts as a team last year. Darren Waller is the tight end now, and he actually may lead the Giants in receiving this year. A new era is starting in Washington with Sam Howell as the quarterback. Howell beat an established veteran in Jacoby Brissett in training camp, so the Commanders' wide receivers group has another opportunity to match their talent level with a new quarterback. Terry McLaurin is a perfect example. Last year, he was graded as the 8th best wide receiver in the NFL. McLaurin was still 10th in receiving yards and 13th in yards per reception last year. If Sam Howell can get the ball to McLaurin more often than Carson Wentz and Taylor Heinicke did, McLaurin may become a league winner at the wide receiver position. Jahan Dotson is back for his second year, and he flashed strong potential as a rookie. Jahan Dotson only caught 35 passes last year, but he did score 7 touchdowns. He was a first-round pick from Penn State who has an uncanny ability to make tough catches in the end zone. Considering how talented McLaurin is, to have a number 2 wide receiver like Jahan Dotson and a talent like Curtis Samuel as the wide receiver 3 makes the Washington group one of the most talented groups who have underproduced in the NFL. This group has been held back by below-average quarterback play for years now. If Sam Howell can make it happen, all 3 of these guys have the talent to produce fantasy points above expectations. Last year in fantasy football, McLaurin was the wide receiver 14 in total points scored, but was only 23rd in average points per game. Dotson averaged 10.7 points per game. Dotson's average was good enough for 47th in the NFL. In fantasy drafts, Terry McLaurin is going as the wide receiver 22 on Yahoo and wide receiver 26 on ESPN. His overall ADP is between 57 and 64. Jahan Dotson is the wide receiver 37 on Yahoo and the wide receiver 39 on ESPN. Dotson's ADP is between 94 and 96 overall. Jahan Dotson is my wide receiver 36, which is slightly above where he's getting drafted, my 84th player overall. He is ranked by Yahoo as their wide receiver 34, but their player 75 overall. ESPN ranks Dotson as their wide receiver 38. Terry McLaurin is ranked as the wide receiver 22 and player 51 by Yahoo. ESPN ranks McLaurin as their wide receiver 24. With the presence of Curtis Samuel, the commitment to the run, and the fact that Sam Howell is a first-year starter, I don't think that Terry McLaurin will be able to reach a ceiling this year. I think that Jahan Dotson will see the ball more than he did as a rookie, which will also probably eat into McLaurin's numbers as well. Because of this, I'm a bit lower on Terry McLaurin in fantasy, but I view him as an elite football talent. McLaurin is my wide receiver 30 and my 74th player overall, which is about a round later than his ADP. A.J. Brown's first year in Philadelphia was better than anyone could have expected. 1,496 yards receiving with a 17-yard average and a catch rate of 60.6%. His 11 touchdowns were good, but because Brown is so physically dominant, he can overpower cornerbacks enough to where he can do better than 11 touchdowns in any given year. Devonta Smith benefited greatly from Brown's arrival, his own improvement into year 2, and Jalen Hurts' growth as a quarterback all coincided together. Smith may have reached a ceiling in year 2, but because he's tied to an elite offense, he should be able to produce strong numbers yet again. A.J. Brown is going as the wide receiver 7 on Yahoo and the wide receiver 9 on ESPN. His overall ADP is 17 or 18, which puts him right in the middle of the second round. Devonta Smith is going as the wide receiver 12 on Yahoo and the wide receiver 15 on ESPN. Brown is undervalued compared to his production from 2022. Brown was the wide receiver 5 in total points scored, and he averaged 18.3 points per game, which was 7th in the league. I believe that his chemistry will get better with Jalen Hurts. If his 60.6 catch rate goes up just a little, A.J. Brown can rise up the leaderboard of wide receivers in the league. Yahoo ranks A.J. Brown as their wide receiver 7 and their 14th player overall. ESPN ranks A.J. Brown as their wide receiver 9. Devonta Smith is ranked as Yahoo's wide receiver 12 and the number 22 player overall. ESPN ranks Smith as their wide receiver 14. I'm a bit higher on A.J. Brown than consensus. He is my wide receiver 3 overall, right after Jamar Chase. I think that the Eagles' offense will be better in 2023 and that the Jalen Hurts-A.J. Brown connection should get better. I think that A.J. Brown is pretty much as sure a thing as you can find in the first round, and he's a relatively safe pick, and he is also the number 7 overall player on my board. I really like Devonta Smith as well, but I'm slightly lower on Smith than ADP. I think that DeAndre Swift and Dallas Goedert will cut into his 136 targets. Devonta Smith averaged 15.4 points per game last year. He was the wide receiver 10 in points scored and the wide receiver 15 in average points per game. That will be tough to duplicate, but Smith is still an elite wide receiver 2 for the Eagles, and he is an elite wide receiver in fantasy football. I rank Devonta Smith as my wide receiver 14 and my number 35 player overall. I realize that he probably will be gone before the end of the third round, but if he lasts to that point, you can draft Devonta Smith with plenty of confidence. The Dallas passing game underachieved in 2022. Dak Prescott's injury and the lack of a strong number 2 threat in Michael Gallup held this part of the team back. I also believe that Dallas missed Amari Cooper. Dak is completely healthy now, and he's primed for a resurgence in Dallas. The acquisition of veteran deep threat Brandon Cooks from the Texans improves the talent level of the wide receiver room as well. In a rough year, Michael Gallup averaged 6.8 points per game, which was the wide receiver 79 in average points. Gallup's catch rate was only 52.7%, which was more than 10 percentage points less than the 63.8% produced by Dallas quarterbacks last year. Gallup's 10.9 yards per catch was also the lowest number of his career. Brandon Cooks is one of the most consistent wide receivers in the league. Cooks was wide receiver 45 in points scored and wide receiver 34 in average points per game. Dak Prescott has career completion percentage of 66.6%, which is much better than the 60.8% produced by Houston's quarterbacks last year. CeeDee Lamb has emerged from Amari Cooper's shadow as an elite wide receiver 1. 1,359 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns, and a 68.5% catch rate are all outstanding numbers. In fantasy football, Lamb scored 18 points per game, which was the 9th best average in the NFL. CeeDee was the wide receiver 6 in total points scored. And remember, this was all done without Dak Prescott for 5 games. The Cowboys will probably pass the ball as efficiently as any team in the NFL. A healthy year from Dak and the 3 wide receivers should mean that there are 3 fantasy-producing wide receivers on the Cowboys. Michael Gallup is getting drafted as the wide receiver 46 on Yahoo and the wide receiver 54 on ESPN. Gallup is going as the player 123 to 126. He's an 11th round pick. I rate Gallup as my wide receiver 62 and my player 145. This is a solid improvement over his performance from last year. I do think that drafters are overrating Gallup by at least a round, though. Brandon Cooks is the wide receiver 40 on Yahoo and the wide receiver 36 drafted on ESPN. His ADP is between 87 and 100. His rankings on Yahoo are wide receiver 43 and player 102. ESPN ranks him as their wide receiver 35. I am absolutely all over Brandon Cooks this year. I rank Brandon Cooks as my wide receiver 33 and my 80th player overall. He should be a strong flex starter on your fantasy team. CeeDee Lamb is the wide receiver 6 drafted on Yahoo and the wide receiver 7 on ESPN. His rankings by Yahoo were wide receiver 6 and player 11. ESPN ranks Lamb as their wide receiver 7. His ADP on both sites is at 16. I am predicting a jump by CeeDee Lamb this year. I rate CeeDee as my wide receiver 4 and my 8th player overall. Everything appears to be lining up for CeeDee Lamb in 2023. If you like today's coverage of the NFC East wide receivers, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.